When we hit the road to travel, it can do the soul wonders to get off the beaten track and head to places that also tell a powerful story. They may not be bustling with as many people, like the Eiffel Tower for example, but they are the perfect backdrop for exquisite photographs and memories to last a lifetime. 15 surreal abandoned destinations. Gereja Ayam, Chicken Church, Indonesia. They say birds of a feather flock together, but if you find yourself in the jungles of central Java in Indonesia, you will find a building once used as both a place of worship and a rehab center. Gereja Ayam, also known as the Chicken Church, opened its doors in the 1990s, but construction came to a halt a decade later when the cost became too high. This beautiful bird is still attracting people from all walks of life and offers the most spectacular views. Floating Forest, SS Airfield, Australia. For 62 years, this ship, built in Britain, was used to transport supplies and returned to service as a steam collier post-1945 until being decommissioned in 1972. Now, the SS Airfield, as it was registered in Australia in 1912, looks more like a floating forest anchored in Homebush Bay, which was home to several shipbreaking operations in the mid-20th century. At 109 years old, most of its superstructure has been reclaimed and scrapped, leaving the hull to float ominously in the bay. Nature has since reclaimed the ship, creating an amazingly beautiful, yet creepy, abandoned shipwreck. Ross Island, Andaman and Nicobar Islands, India. Netaji Subhash Chandra Bose Dweep Island was originally set up as the residential headquarters for the British administration of the Indian Penal Settlement in the Andaman Islands. Ross Island, as it used to be known, is now abandoned entirely. The island was initially inhabited in the late 18th century, but the settlement was soon abandoned during inclement weather conditions, which contributed to a high mortality rate on the island. Ross Island was repopulated 100 years later, when a prison and penal colony was set up, which was run by the British administration until 1942, when Japanese troops invaded the island. The remnant of Japanese bunkers remains, as well as some old houses, a large swimming pool and a hospital, where the brick walls were overtaken by the roots of wild ficus plants. Hartawan, Shengshan Island, China. A fishing village called Hartawan in the Shengshi Islands of China has been abandoned for years, but may well be the most verdant and stunningly green village the world over, as nearly every building is overgrown with ivy and other lush vegetation. This gem, situated about 40 miles from Shanghai, was once an active settlement inhabited by around 2,000 fishermen and their families. In the early 1990s, when the small bay became increasingly unable to meet the growing fish industry's needs, residents began migrating to the mainland in search of other employment and a better life. Soon, nearly every house was abandoned, and only a handful of residents remain to this day. Inside the deserted houses, you will still spot decaying items and pieces of furniture exactly as they were placed over 30 years ago. It truly is a wondrous sight and a photographer's paradise. Sorrento Abandoned Mill, Italy. An abandoned mill near Naples in Italy has been reclaimed by nature. Falun dei Malini, known as the Valley of Mills, is stunningly beautiful in its decrepitude. The mill, which was built in the 10th century, was used as a flour mill until its closure in 1866, when the Tasso Square was built. This event isolated the mill from the sea, increasing its humidity, rendering it impractical. Plantsmen can feast their eyes on a variety of unique plants. The fact that this is a moisture-rich area with almost a complete lack of ventilation adds to the ambiance of this geological masterpiece. Coleman, Namibia. If you fancy a tour in Africa where you can experience German architecture from the early 1900s, then Colemanskop in Namibia should be on your bucket list. Once an area to hunt for diamonds, Colemanskop turned into a buzzing town in the desert, where a hospital, bowling alley, and other amenities were built. Shortly after 1918, the area became a ghost town when word spread that diamonds were discovered elsewhere along the coast. As expected, residents hurried to the new hotspot, and the area quietened down totally in 1928. The desert is slowly reclaiming ownership in the region, and the unique town is now a tourist destination. City Methodist Church, Gary, Indiana. Fancy a Gothic wedding? Then Gary Methodist Church in Indiana might be a perfect setting for your special day. Not to mention that the 9-story building is featured in several Hollywood films for its incredible architecture, stone pillars, and stained glass windows. The church was shut down in 1975, and the structure is still crumbling bit by bit every day. Next time you watch Nightmare on Elm Street or Ben Affleck's blockbuster Pearl Harbor, see if you can spot Gary in the footage. Great train resting place, Uyuni, Bolivia. Whether you are a train spotter or a student of ferroequinology, a visit to one of Bolivia's most unusual attractions in Uyuni will be well spent. The area, known for its salt flats and red lakes, has become a graveyard for abandoned antique trains. In the early 1900s, plans were put in place to extend the transportation of Uyuni by building more tracks, but technical difficulties and objections from the local indigenous people resulted in miners who used to transport minerals leaving town. The trains are now corroded, which adds to the spirit of a resting place for abandoned trains. Canfranc International Railway Station, Spain. Once the largest rail station in Europe, the glamorous Canfranc Station in the Spanish Pyrenees has quite a history. 8 years after opening in 1928, it was first affected by the Spanish civil conflict and was then taken over during the 1940s. Restoration efforts have been plenty, but the station's former glory could just never be restored. Canfranc Station's past is filled with tragedy, excitement and drama, creating the perfect setting for photographers. Plans are in place to give Canfranc back some of its former glory in the hopes of attracting more tourists. Buzzards Monument, Bulgaria. This abandoned monument, which sits high in the Bulgarian mountains, was once the house of the Bulgarian Communist Party. In the height of Soviet influence, the party decided to erect the monument to commemorate socialist communism. The monument is now abandoned on the remote Buzzards Peak. Work on the monument began in 1974 and was undertaken by units of the Bulgarian army, assisted by numerous artisans responsible for the large statues and murals. Images of Lenin and Marx looked over the arena, built for state functions and celebrations, with a red star-shaped window in honor of Soviet Russia. After the government's fall from power in 1989, the site was eventually vandalized, where most of the artwork inside the Buzzards monument was either removed or destroyed. Since the structure survived the elements, a preservation team worked to get the monument listed as one of the 7 most endangered heritage sites in Europe. Vandalism will also no longer be tolerated, as this site is now guarded 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Kennecott, Alaska. For 105 days between Memorial Day and Labor Day, you can visit the Wrangell Street Elias National Park to feast your eyes on a dilapidated yet beautiful mining town in Kennecott, Alaska, where nearly $200 million worth of copper was processed. In its heyday, between 1911 and 1938, the town had a hospital, skating rink, tennis court, and even a dairy. These buildings have been abandoned for over 60 years. The park made a recreational hall available to rent after it acquired most of the buildings and land in 1998. New York State Pavilion, Flushing Meadows, New York. This much-loved futuristic structure was built for the World Fair in 1964. The initial intention was to destroy the entire structure after 90 days after the fair, but it was deemed too expensive to do so. The pavilion had 3 main concrete structures called Tent of Tomorrow, which once supported the largest cable suspension roof in the world. The public, rock stars, and film producers have all used this abandoned venue. Sadly, vandals also had an interest in the site, vandalizing and destroying many parts of it. The structure was given the status as one of America's national treasures, with a massive restoration project currently underway at a cost of $24 million. Shima Island, Nagasaki, Japan. It is hard to imagine that an island, once the most densely populated in the world, is now a ghost town in the middle of the ocean. People flocked to Shima Island in Japan after a coal deposit was discovered. Miners and laborers came to the island, making a life, living in small apartment complexes. But when the coal ran out, the residents scrambled to greener pastures, leaving the island empty and abandoned. Centralia, Pennsylvania. If ever you wanted to check out a real ghost town, then Centralia in Pennsylvania will be just what you're looking for. Over 1,000 people lived in this coal mining town until a fire in 1962, which made it uninhabitable. The fire, which started at a landfill, swept through the town, creating a health and safety crisis for residents. Today, Centralia will greet you with eerily empty houses and streets, where in some places there is still steam coming out from the ground. Don't leave town until you have walked on Graffiti Highway. Have you ever visited any of these abandoned locations? Share your experience with us in the comments below. 1. Pripyat, Ukraine. If you thought a ghost town was eerie, imagine an entire city where every single resident had to evacuate in haste. On April 26, 1986, a radioactive release 10 times bigger than the nuclear release in Hiroshima changed the lives of thousands of Ukrainians, whose tragedy will live on in history forever. dishes rotting in sinks, stained sheets and pillows, and much-loved dolls found scattered on the floor is a harrowing reminder of the sheer panic of families forced to let go of everything they ever knew and loved. To this day, the city remains untouched as radiation levels are too high for people to survive. Fast forward to 2020, and a large amount of greenery has since covered parts of the city abandoned over 3 decades ago. Residents will never be allowed to return, and no human will be safe to live there for the next 20,000 years, it's estimated.